that's why we're so fortunate tonight to have the opportunity to hear from one of the nation's foremost experts on love and relationships. Because as we seek to live out true love in our culture, again, it's just going to be confrontational, hopefully in a good way, but it's going to be confrontational because what we believe truth to be, many in the culture do not. As anyone who has attended one of his marriage conferences knows, Dr. Gary Chapman's expertise begins with the success and failures he and his wife Carolyn have experienced in their marriage for more than 45 years. I think my wife would suggest that we have enough content, at least from my side, to write several volumes of books about that. But Dr. Chapman's own life experiences, plus over 35 years of pastoring and marriage counseling, led him to publish his first book in the Love Languages series, The 5 Love Languages, How to Express Heartfelt Commitment to Your Mate. Many of the millions of readers, and maybe some folks in this room, credit this continual New York Times bestseller with saving their marriages by showing them simple and practical ways to communicate love. Since the success of his first book, Dr. Chapman has expanded his 5 Love Languages series with special editions specifically designed for singles, for men, and for parents of teens and young children. Dr. Chapman speaks to thousands of couples nationwide through his weekend marriage conferences. He hosts a nationally syndicated radio program, A Love Language Minute, and a Saturday morning program, Building Relationships with Dr. Gary Chapman, both airing on more than 400 stations. Dr. Chapman and Carolyn have 2 grown children and currently live in Winston-Salem. It's fortunate that we're able to call you a true North Carolinian and have that here. And I know that Henry and Alan were so grateful, and we're also grateful that you would be with us tonight. But he serves in Winston-Salem as Senior Associate Pastor at Calvary Baptist Church. Dr. Chapman holds a BA and MA degrees in anthropology from Wheaton College and Wake Forest University, respectively, MRE and PH degrees from Southwestern Baptist Theological Seminary, and has completed postgraduate work at both the University of North Carolina and at Duke University. We won't ask him his perspectives on a certain basketball game that took place this weekend. Maybe he'll share that with us, but we'll leave that up to you. Ladies and gentlemen, please join me in welcoming Dr. Gary Chapman.
Well, thank you, John. It's great to be here tonight. You know, when people ask me who I root for all over the country, they ask me, and I say, well, when you did a master's at Wake and you did graduate work at the other 2 that he mentioned, it just depends on who's winning. I like winners. I like winners. Well, it is great to be here tonight. And first of all, I just want to thank you for what you're doing, all of you who are involved in this work. I believe that at the root of almost all of our social problems today is the breakdown of family in this country. When you look at all the social issues, you can almost always trace them back to fractured families. So what you're doing to try to set policies that will tend to help us have healthy families, and what I'm doing in terms of the practical side of trying to give people tools by which they can have those families, we're working together as a team. You know, the scriptures say that we're to speak the truth in love. And we must never forget either one of those. We're speaking the truth. We must always speak the truth, but we must also do it in love. So what I want to talk about tonight is the love part, okay? You've been hearing the truth part. I want to talk about the love part. And one of the things I appreciate about the North Carolina Family Council is that they do seek to speak the truth in love. Many, many efforts to speak the truth in love, as opposed to speaking the truth in a harsh and critical and condemning way of individuals. My daughter and I were in L.A. We had attended a medical conference there, and we were headed back to North Carolina. And we were fortunate enough to get bumped up to first class, which is always nice, right? The problem was she was seated in a window seat, and I was seated in a window seat, and I was in row 3 and she was in row 5. And I said, well, honey, don't worry. I said, probably somebody will change seats with us and we can sit together on that long ride home. So the man came first and sat down beside my daughter in the aisle seat, and she said, excuse me, would you mind exchanging seats with my father so that we can sit together? And the man didn't look at her. He just said, is it an aisle seat? And she said, no, sir, it's a window seat. He said, can't do that. Don't like crawling over people. And my daughter said, well, I can understand that. Then the man came and sat down beside me in the aisle seat, and I said to him, excuse me, would you mind exchanging seats with my daughter so we could sit together on our flight home? And he said, oh, I'd be glad to. And I said, now, it's a window seat. He said, no problem, I'd love to. And he exchanged seats with my daughter. And I thought, what's the difference in those two men? They both looked to me like businessmen. They were dressed like businessmen, and they looked to be in their mid-50s. And I thought, did they go to different kindergartens? Or did one of them get a kindness gene that the other one didn't get? Or did one of their parents teach them to be kind to people, and the other one said, look out for yourself? Or did the man that took the window seat really prefer a window seat? Or did he have a daughter and the other one didn't have a daughter? And those questions kept ringing in my mind for weeks after that. And I thought, you know, what does make people be lovers and others not lovers? And what does it look like if you're a loving person? How would you recognize a loving person if you saw one? Well, that led me on a journey that lasted for 2 years, in which I asked thousands of people all over the country 2 questions. Question number 1, could you give me the name of a family member or a friend whom you consider to be a loving person? And if they did, the second question was, why? Why do you say that they are a loving person? And their answers fell into 7 categories. I was hoping for 5. I like 5. But they fell into 7 categories. And I later called them the 7 traits of love. And I wrote a book called Love as a Way of Life, in which I posed the question, what would happen in this country or any country if a significant number of people became lovers? Think about it. So what I want to do briefly is to share with you those 7 traits, and incidentally, you'll find all of them in the Bible, which says to me that anything you discover in social research, if it's really true, you'll find in the Scriptures. So let me give you these 7 traits, and what I want you to think about in terms of your own life, and ask yourself questions as we go through this. If you had asked me before I started this study, are you a loving person? I think I would have said, yeah, I think so. I try to be. I want to be. Sometimes I am. But I discovered when I dug into this, I had a lot of room for growth. And there's a good chance that maybe you have some room for growth. So let's think about it together. Number 1 is kindness, which was illustrated on the airplane. I describe kindness as actions and words that benefit others. That's essentially what the word means. It's to use words and actions that benefit other people. I don't know if you went to Sunday school when you were little, but one of the first things little children learn in church is be ye kind one to another. But you know what I observed about children? They will be kind to you if you are kind to them. But if you mess with their art, or you push them in the water line, they go back to being normal. And I've found that adults are not very different. Most of us can be kind to people that are kind to us, but we have a little difficulty being kind to people who are not like us and who don't believe what we believe. and don't treat us the way we treat them. One husband said to me, Gary, he said, I was watching a game on TV, and my wife said, honey, can we talk about, and I said to her, honey, we've already talked about that. Besides, the game's on right now. And he said, she walked out of the room. And he said 30 minutes, 40 minutes later, she came back in the room, and she had a TV tray with a sandwich and a Coke and chips. And she set it down in front of me and said, I love you. And she walked out of the room. And he said, I sat there and thought, this is not right. She should not be doing this the way I talked to her. And he said, every bite I took of that sandwich, I thought, this is not good. This is not good. So I said, finally, I set her aside, and I went in there and said, honey, I'm sorry. I'm sorry I talked to you harshly. And I'm sorry I didn't take time to talk with you. Let's talk. And she said, no, honey, it's so fine. It's okay. You can finish the game. He said, no, the game's not important. I want to talk to you. See, there's a kind man there's a kind wife. There's a kind wife and a husband who's responding to kindness which he did not deserve. People tend to respond kindly when they recognize that they don't deserve to be treated kindly. A second is patience. Accepting the imperfections of other people. Patience is allowing your spouse to misplace the car keys every 3 days and not preaching them a sermon about God is a God of order. Folks, I hate to tell you, but there are some people who are not wired to keep up with car keys. And I don't care how many hooks you put in the garage and tell them, please hang the keys on the hook. They will not. And I don't care if you attach the keys to a tennis ball and you say they surely will not lose the tennis ball. I'm telling you, they will lose the tennis ball. Best thing you can do if you have a spouse like that is to get you 4 sets of keys and say, honey, use these. I'm sure we'll find the others later. And you will. You'll find them. Patience, allowing people to be human. I remember a manager who said to me in a business, he said, Gary, I was just totally put out with one of my administrative assistants. Said she just wasn't performing. And I went home and told my husband. 2 or 3 days I complained about it. And he said, honey, maybe something's going on in her life that you don't know about. Before you fire her, which he said what I wanted to do, why don't you talk with her and find out what's going on? She said the next day I sat down and talked with her, found out her son was strung out on drugs and the whole family was in turmoil. And she said I was empathetic with her. I helped her get her son in a treatment center. She said a year later, she's the best administrative assistant I have. So you have to be patient with people where they are in the journey, but you never know what they're going through. Number 3 is forgiveness. Loving people will forgive. Freedom from the grip of anger. All of us are wrong from time to time, sometimes by people we love most. The Bible is very, very clear if someone sins against you. Jesus said, you rebuke them, you confront them, Matthew 17, you confront them. And if they repent, you forgive them. If they don't repent, it says in Matthew 18, you approach them again. And if they repent, you forgive them. If they don't, you take somebody from church with you and approach them again. And then if they don't, he says you treat them as a pagan. You turn them over to God. And you release the anger, and you release the hurt, and you release the person to God. We don't have to live with anger. Anger is designed to be a visitor, never a resident. Anger is a gift of God. All great social reform has been born of anger. And there's some anger in the work that we do as the policy. Anger motivates people to take constructive action. But a lot of our anger grows out of simply the fact we did not get our way in certain things. Our wife did not load the dishwasher the way we load the dishwasher, etc., etc. Forgiveness of people. You have to distinguish between what I call definitive anger, when people do wrong, and distorted anger, when we simply did not get our preference. And much of the anger that we have is in that category. We either need to forgive people for doing wrong or release people when they don't confess the wrong. Number 4 is courtesy. Loving people are courteous people. We typically think of courtesy as those lists of things our parents taught us growing up, such as don't eat, don't speak when you have food in your mouth. Or we used to have a rule at our house in the early days with our children, we don't sing at the table. And one day I said to my wife, "Why do we have that rule?" And she said, "Well, that's what my mama said." I said, "Well, the Bible says to be joyful. I mean, what's wrong with singing?" And I said, "I can see you don't sing if you got food in your mouth, but what's wrong with singing?" So we decided just to get away with that little courtesy, my mama taught me when you come into a room, if you got a cap on, you take it off. It was common courtesy. I was sitting with my mother. She was 85, and we were in a restaurant, and she said, "Look at that boy over there. He's got his cap on. Got his cap on in the restaurant." I said, "Mama, honey, it's a new day. It's a new day, Mama." His mama didn't teach him to take his hat off when he went in. But most of us think of courtesy as being those kind of things. But the word is much deeper than that. The word comes from two Greek words. One means the mind, and the other means friend. Courtesy is to be friendly-minded. It's to treat people as though they were your friend. Imagine what would happen if we treated everyone we encountered as though they were a friend. You're in the car. You pull into a parking lot, and you see an empty space, and you're going for it. But then you see another car come around the corner, and what do? Woo, got it! But what if you considered the person in the other car to be your friend? What would you have done? Chances are you'd have let them have the place. Are you with me? Courtesy. Or being courteous to the people the telemarketers that call you on the phone, trying to sell you vinyl siding for your brick house. I mean, I wonder when they hang up if they would ever guess that you're a Christian. I mean, wouldn't it be better to say, I don't need vinyl siding because I've got a brick house, but I'm glad you have a job and I hope things go well for you tonight. God bless you. Wouldn't that be a better way? Now we've even declared July as being cell phone courtesy month. That's how bad it's gotten in our country with cell phones. When I realized how bad it was, I was actually counseling a man in my office one day, and his phone rang, and he said, "Excuse me." And he had a conversation in the middle of our counseling session with somebody else. And I thought, this is not right. There's something wrong with this picture. And I see couples going out to eat, and they're sitting there together, and one of them's talking on the phone, the other's just looking. And I see parents who are engaged in a conversation with children, and their cell phone rings, and they say, "Excuse me, honey," and they answer their phone. And the little child must be thinking, they're more important than I am. Folks, that's what voicemail is all about. They'll leave you a voicemail. Okay, we'll move on. Courtesy. And then humility. Loving people are people of humility. I define this as stepping down so others can step up. Jesus is the best example, Philippians chapter 2, who though he was God, did not demand his rights as God, but stepped down to become a man. And once he became a man, he stepped down even further to death, even death on a cross. And the scriptures say, "Let this attitude be in you, which was also in Christ Jesus." We're called upon to step down so others can step up. We do this rather well for our children. Most parents are willing to step down so their kids can step up. We're willing to humble ourselves and lift them up. But what about other people? What about somebody else's son, somebody else's daughter? I was talking with a manager in a business who said to me, Gary, said, I had the strangest thing happen in my office. He said, I had an opening and I called in a young man who was just 2 years out of college. And I said, I've got an opening, and I think you might be interested in it. And he said, I wanted to talk with you about it. He said, I'm interviewing actually you and one other guy. And he told him the name of the other guy. And he said, I want to get the best person for this, and I think you might be, I don't know. And this young college graduate, 2 years out of college, said to me, how old? And he called the name of the other guy. How old is the other guy? And I said, well, I don't know, maybe 45. And the young man said, I think you should give him the job. He said, really? Why would you say that? He said, because he's older, I'm younger, I'll have other opportunities, but he may not have another opportunity. I think you ought to give it to him. And he said, I did. And he said, when that older man found out what that young man had done, he took that young man under his arms, taught him everything he knew. And he said that young man 3 or 4 years later was promoted right up the ladder. You see, a young guy, you don't find that much, willing to step down so somebody else could step up. It's always better to help others rise than it is to rise yourself. Number 6 is generosity. Loving people are generous people. We often think of generosity only as giving money, but that's only a part of it. A loving person will be generous with their time. There was a lady in our church some years ago by the name of Ann Winger. She had polio, and she walked very haltingly. She was a speech pathologist. And once she retired, she opened her door each day, and the word got out around town that if your child needed help from speech, you could take her over to see Ann, and Ann would help them and not charge anything. And she did that for years. She had an ability, but she was also willing to give her time. She didn't need the money. She was retired. She gave her time to help young children. Then it's not just time, it's also our talents and our abilities. I was on the road one night in the wintertime, and my wife called me. It was a Friday night, and she said, honey, the house is cold. I said, well, honey, probably the pilot light is out. I said, go down there in the garage and just look in there and see if you see a light, anything burning. And she came back and said, no, nothing burning in there. I said, well, okay. I said, I'll tell you what, why don't you call Larry? I said, I'd call Larry. If he's at home, he'll come over there and he'll get it lit for you. I knew Larry knew how to do that, In fact, if I was at home, I'd probably call Larry myself because he can do it faster than I can. And so I called her back in an hour and a half, and she said, it's getting warm. The guy had an ability, and he used it. Used it to help her. Loving people are people who will be generous with their time and with their abilities, but also with their money. Those who are super wealthy, when they donate, they typically get recognized. When Bill Gates formed his charitable foundation back in 1994 and made an initial contribution of $94 million, it made the headlines. And when Warren Buffett later gave $30 billion to Bill Gates' foundation, it made the headlines. But you probably never read about Albert Lexie. Albert Lexie was a shoe shine guy in Philadelphia. And he heard about a fund for children at the hospital. And so he asked the hospital if he could come to their lobby 2 days a week and shine shoes if he gave all of his tips to the hospital fund for children. And they agreed to let him do it. And over the next few years, he gave $100,000 to the hospital children's fund. You see, don't think that if you don't give generously when you have little, that you will give generously when you have much. It doesn't work that way. If you're a loving person, you'll be a generous person, and whatever level you are in terms of the financial thing, you will be giving to people. W.S. Plummer said, he who is not liberal with what he has does but deceive himself if he thinks he will be liberal if he had more. You know, I wonder what would happen in most of our churches if people just gave 10% to God. I have a friend, I was visiting with him in Michigan, and we were raising some money at our church, and I was talking to him about it, not trying to get a gift from him, but he said, "Gary, did I ever tell you my story?" I said, "No, I don't think so." He said, when my wife and I got married, he said, we both had been tithers as singles. We gave 10% to God. He said, the first year in my business, God had blessed my business, and I just said to my wife, "You know, honey, God has blessed us this year." He said, "Would you be okay if we gave 11% to God this year?" And she said, "Well, yeah, honey, that's fine with me." Well, he said the next year God blessed our business, and I went back to her and said, "Honey, you know, God's been good. What do you think?" And we go up to 12%. And she said, "Well, yeah, honey." He said, "Dr. Chapman, we've been doing that every year of our marriage." I said, "How long have y'all been married?" He said, he smiled. He said, 49 years. So at that juncture, he was giving away 59% of all of his income. I really believe you cannot outgive God. Winston Churchill once said, "We make a living by what we earn. We make a life by what we give." I was in Westminster Abbey some years ago, and I found the grave of Christopher Chapman. I'd like to think that I'm related to him. The stone was dated 1680, and on the stone was the following words: "What I gave, I have. What I spent, I had. What I left, I lost by not giving it away." Some years ago, a man in our church gave a rather significant contribution, and 2 years later, he went bankrupt in his business and lost everything. And I said to him at lunch one day, I said, do you regret what you gave the church? He said, "No, Gary. That's all I have now. That's all I have now." You see, when we give to the cause of God, we give for eternity. So I'm challenging you tonight to be a loving person when it comes time to giving tonight, okay? Number 7 is honesty. Loving people are honest people. They are people of integrity. They will speak the truth. If they tell you, you can count on it. You know it's true. You know, an acquaintance will tell you what you want to hear, but a friend will tell you what you need to hear. I've always been grateful for the people who thought enough of me to tell me the truth, because when they tell you the truth, then chances are you have a chance to make things different. Robert Stark, who is a sociologist, professor now at Baylor University, studied the early church and tried to figure out how it is that in 40 years or in 300 years the church could grow from the few people that Jesus had, to half the Roman world, half the Roman Empire. And what he discovered was this: that when 2 major plagues hit the world, and all the social elites fled the cities to survive, it was the Christians who stayed in the city and who reached out to care for everybody that was left, whether they were Christians or non-Christians. And they treated everyone as though they were family. And he said, his conclusion was that it was not argument that led people to become Christians. It was simply observing Christians loving others as they love their own family. I really believe that the greatest power for good in the world is love. So I want to challenge you to continue growing in the grace of love. In the book, I actually give you, at every chapter, I give you a little pre-test. Take a little test and see where you are. And then I develop the idea, and then I give you challenges on how to cooperate with God in building these things into your life. So I hope that you will join me and others. This book was published by Doubleday and Waterbrook, secular publisher and Christian publisher. Only difference is in the Christian version, I have scriptures in the back for study guides. And in the secular version, I just have questions for reading groups. My objective is to try to get non-Christians to try to do this, because I know they're not going to be successful. A lady said to me this week when I was speaking at Wake Forest University Business School, speaking on servant leadership, and she said, it appears to me, Dr. Chapman, that that's not very feasible in today's world, that most CEOs are not servant leaders. And she said, how do you explain that? And I said, well, I agree with you. I said, they're not, because all of us by nature are selfish. By nature, we're all selfish. And she said, well, how does that get changed? I said, well, I can just give you my personal example, and I'll give you my example tonight. Before we got married, I was madly in love with my wife, and I could hardly wait to be as happy as I was going to be. I mean, I'd never met a girl like this. I never felt like this before. I could hardly wait to be happy. But after we got married, I had these visions of what it was going to be like. I was in graduate school, and I thought, I'll go to classes in the morning, and I'll come home in the afternoon, and I'll study, and then we'll have dinner together, and then I'll study some more, and she'll sit on the couch while I study. And when I get through studying, I'll lift my eyes, and our eyes will touch. But after we got married, I found out that my wife did not want to sit on the couch and watch me study. She would go downstairs to the apartment complex, meet people, talk to people, socialize. And I'm up there by myself thinking, this is what it was like before we got married. The only difference, I was in that dorm room a whole lot cheaper than this place. And I had this idea before we got married that every night, about 10:30, we were going to go to bed together. Woo! Going to go to bed with a woman every night at 10:30. But after we got married, I found out it never crossed her mind to go to bed with anybody at 10:30. Her idea was about 10:30, you come up from your visitation and read a book till midnight. And I'm thinking, why didn't you read the book while I read the book? Then we could go to bed together. And before we got married, I had this idea that every morning when the sun gets up, everybody gets up. But after we got married, I found out my wife didn't do mornings. And we succeeded at being utterly miserable. And what compounded the problem for me is that 2 weeks after we got married, I enrolled in seminary to study to be a pastor. And here I am miserable in my marriage and thinking I married the wrong person. It's never going to work out. And the closer I got to graduation, the more miserable I became, because I was saying to myself and later to God, there is no way that I can be this miserable at home and to get up and preach hope to people. And as I got closer to graduation, never forget the night I said to God, I don't know what else to do. I've done everything I know to do, and it's not getting any better. If anything, it's getting worse, and I don't know what else to do. And as soon as I prayed that prayer, there came to my mind a visual image of Jesus on his knees washing the feet of his disciples. You remember the story? And I heard God say to me, that is the problem in your marriage. You do not have the attitude of Christ toward your wife. Hit me like a ton of bricks. Because I remember what Jesus said when he stood up. Do you remember? He stood up and said, I am your leader, and in my kingdom, this is the way you lead. Leaders serve. And I knew that was not my attitude. My attitude in the early years of our marriage was something like this. Look, I know how to have a good marriage. If you'll listen to me, we'll have one. She wouldn't listen to me. I blamed her. But that day I got a different message. And I said, Lord, forgive me. With all of my study in Greek and Hebrew and theology, I've missed the whole point. And then I said, please give me the attitude of Christ toward my wife. In retrospect, the greatest prayer I ever prayed regarding my marriage, because God changed my heart. 3 questions made it practical for me. When I was willing to ask these 3 questions, my marriage radically changed. Simple questions. Number 1, honey, how could I help you? Number 2, how could I make your life easier? Question number 3, how could I be a better husband to you? Do you know when I was willing to ask those questions, my wife was willing to give me answers. She told me. Now remember, this was long before I knew anything about the love languages. But essentially, she was teaching me how I could love her. And do you know what happened? Not overnight. But within 3 months, my wife started asking me those 3 questions. We've been walking this road a long time, and I have an incredible wife. I said to her the other day, you know, Carolyn, if every woman in the world was like you, there'd never be a divorce. Why would a man leave a woman who's doing everything she can to help him? And my goal through these years has been to so serve my wife that when I'm gone, she'll never find another man that treat her the way I've treated her. The woman's gonna miss me. And you know what I believe? I believe this was God's intention. Listen, God did not ordain marriage to make people miserable. God ordained marriage because He knows that He made us for each other. And when a husband gives himself to his wife like Christ did the church, and she reciprocates, you both become winners. You see, in the early days, we were both losers. I shot her as she shot me, and we stayed wounded most of the time. But when you do it God's way, you both become winners. And that's not the end. Then you can turn and bless the world with the abilities God has given you. You know what I believe? One of the reasons the contemporary church does not reach more non-Christians is because our churches are filled with married couples who have never gotten it together. And they fight or they coexist, and they have no motivation to say to non-Christians, wouldn't you like to be a Christian and be as miserable as we are? But I'm going to tell you this. If we get our marriages together, the non-Christian will recognize it, and they'll ask you, how do y'all do that? And you can tell them how your heart got changed and how you learned to serve each other. And if you get it going in the home, in the marriage, it'll spill over to your kids. It'll spill over in the church. It'll spill over in your work. And it'll permeate the whole thing. So I want to challenge you tonight. Hopefully these words will encourage you to keep on the journey. John had asked that I bring along a few books, so I brought the one I'm just talking about, Love is a Way of Life. Then I brought the 5 love languages. If you haven't read it, I hope you will. If you've read it, I hope you get a copy for your mother, your daddy, and your brother, and your sister. Yeah, your mother-in-law. Yeah. And then this book is the one that Herb mentioned, How to Really Love Your Adult Child. I wrote this with Dr. Ross Campbell, Christian psychiatrist, and it's how to love your kids. It takes longer to get them out of the nest today, and once you get them out, they come back. So how do you love your adult children? And then my newest book, Growing Up Social, Raising Relational Kids in a Screen-Driven World. A lot of children are spending more time looking at a screen than they are looking in the eyes of their parents. And screens will never teach your children relational skills. I'm trying to give parents some help on how to make the technical world an asset rather than a liability. Okay? All right. Thank you. Enjoyed being with you.